We always have a blast chatting with our guests about all sorts of different topics, but sometimes we go off the rails and dig deeper into their automotive and motorsports pasts. As a bonus, let's go behind the scenes with this pit stop minisode for some extra content that didn't quite fit in the main episode. Sit back, enjoy, and remember to like, subscribe, and support Break Fix on Patreon. So we had a great time talking with Donovan about Garage Riot, but we felt the listeners didn't get to know Donovan as a motorsports and car enthusiast. So as an encore to the original episode, we put together this mini-sode based on our post-session happy hour. Sit back, enjoy, and remember to like, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. And as always, I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm Eric.
So let's roll.
But yeah, I've had a 63 split window Vette. I had that car for about a year and a half. I actually had the 327 340 horse. So that was the third in the chain of four. So the only one that was bigger motor, and that was the Fuelie, which actually, side story, that one may have ended up being a Fuelie. So real quick, I'll tell you the story how I bought that car. So a buddy of mine was a Playboy photographer, and he did work for like the college girls issues, that kind of thing. And he was also a DJ in a bar in town. And I was in there one night and, just kind of BSing. And I said, hey, listen, if you need anybody to hold any lights or anything, wink, wink, let me know and I'll go with you. So about 2-3 months later, he said, hey, actually, I need some help. Because he usually had a small crew that would go with him and, 2 or 3 guys that would help him set up and, move equipment between rooms and things. So
when you got done doing the happy dance.
Yeah, exactly. So, my particular role that day was gopher, apparently. So I had to drive downtown and get some lenses and some equipment that he had rented. And we went over to a house south of Atlanta down by the airport that was right around George Foreman's mansion, I think it is. And it was one of Jermaine Dupri's house. So huge mansion. I mean, it was unbelievable. They actually had a caretaker that lived in the house, and he would follow us after every room and make sure that we turned off the lights because the electric bill was so expensive. So it was something like $2,000 a month or something to power this house. So we did that shoot, and it was very, you want to say, oh, it was all, but it was work. We're just, lugging in gear and setting up. So I was like, okay, well, that was cool. Maybe again once more, a couple times. So calls me again a few weeks later and says, I've got this shoot. Now I need different help, right? I'm kind of the lead carrier of all the equipment. I'm not the gopher anymore. So I go in and help. So we start the shoot. We go to this house just north of downtown. This amazing house has almost this moat. He's got this bridge you drive over to get in this house, and the owner isn't home. So we go in, and he knew him. He knew the owner, obviously. So we go in, we're setting up, and everything's going on that day, and everything's going wrong. At one point, they were doing video too, and I'm having to lay on the floor, and the girl's on a turntable, and I'm turning the table trying to stay out of the picture. It was Georgia Tech shoot or something. So we go up to one of the other rooms, and he's doing the photography shoot, and he says, hey, my light meter, the batteries are dead. I didn't bring any with me. Can you guys go? And there were two other guys with us. Can you guys kind of look around and see if you can find any batteries? So I don't like looking around people's house. I don't know about you guys, but I go down in the kitchen, and I went to kind of the utility drawer, and I don't see anything in there. And the garage was right there. So I opened the garage, and as soon as I opened the garage, you could see it was a 3-car garage, and the last car had kind of a half wall, so you couldn't really see what it was. But the two close, you could see they were covered up, and they were obviously C2 Corvettes, right? You can't mistake that shape. So, I'd never really been around C2 Corvettes very often, seen a couple. So I went around, kind of checked the back and rubbed on the back and could tell it was a split window. So I looked around his workbench, didn't see anything, went back inside. So about 15-20 minutes later, the owner comes home, and they introduce us to him and everything. And I made the mistake of saying, hey, I was in your garage and messing with your cars, and I see you have a split window, right? So you can imagine how that went over. And he humored me and was like, yeah, that's great. But it was very, very short with me. So we finished the day, and I felt like an idiot, and we leave. Well, I go back in some months later to this bar where my buddy's DJing, and come to find out the guy that owned the house moonlights as the manager at that bar, right? During the day, he does whatever he does, making the big bucks, and at night he is this manager. So I see him, and I went up to him, and again, just BS, and said, hey, listen, I'll give you 40 for that car. And at the time, I hadn't really priced out C2s very often, but I knew they were 80, 90 grand, and the Fuelies were over that. So, it was kind of a, haha, I'll give you 40 grand, and now I'm going to go back and sit down, and that kind of thing. And he kind of chuckled. So 3 days later, I get a phone call from him. He got my number from my buddy, and he says, hey, listen, you weren't that far off. And I'm thinking, 40, 50 grand is pretty far off. So, no thanks. He goes, why don't you come look at the car? And I blew him off, man, for weeks. And finally he stopped calling. And about, gosh, I don't know, some time passed, some couple months or something. He calls me again. He said, hey, listen, I'm selling some of my cars. The other one, the second car, by the way, was a 427 convertible. I think it was a 67 427. Really nice car. He said, I'm getting rid of that one. I'm getting rid of the split window. If you want it, come look at it. He said, like I said, you weren't very far off. Let's talk about price. Come see it. And at that point I was like, you know what, at the very least, I'm just going to go drive it. I've never driven a split window. I'll get a drive out of it. And, this guy will stop messing with me. So go out there, check it out. He had mostly restored, he'd restored the chassis, the frame, everything. The engine was still original. The body was still original. It'd been repainted. It was originally Daytona blue, and he changed it to the silver blue. So I went out for a ride in it. And afterwards, he asked me, what do you think? And I said, it was great, but hey, I can't afford it. And, he said, well, 42.5. And I'm thinking, okay, is it stolen? What's the story? So I played it cool and, said, okay, well, I'll give it some thought. And I left. I immediately called my uncle, who's a big Corvette guy, and basically said he would disown me if I didn't go back and pick up that car. So I bought it, but I had it for a year and a half. I think I put maybe 100 miles on it. I was afraid to drive it. A car like that, although it's not, it's not a one-off Ferrari, still it's not super common. I was afraid somebody was going to run a red light and hit me. Had some adventures in it, ran out of gas, even though it was half a tank. Come to find out the fuel gauge was stuck. He forgot to tell me that. So, no gas in the tank. So I was the jerk on the side of the road in a split window Corvette. But when I went to sell it, we went through kind of this process of, trying to identify everything. And I'd put it up on eBay and we couldn't find the engine numbers. And he told me, hey, I bought it from my uncle, which now maybe that was my uncle's story. He said, but, the engine was original. They had it rebuilt and the guys had shaved, doing some of the work, they'd somehow shaved the numbers off or something. So I took it to a really great Corvette place here. I'll give them a shout out, even though they're not a sponsor, North Georgia Corvette. And the guys had the car for a couple of weeks. And I told them about that. And they said, well, we can acid etch, the engine and try to pull those numbers out. So I let them do that. Couldn't pull it out. So now I'm thinking, okay, great. And I tried to sell it, like I said before that, on eBay. And I got questions from a guy who was in Arizona, I think a lawyer. And he basically told me, if you sell me that car and it's not what you say it is, we're going to have a problem. So I didn't want to get in a situation where, I was selling something as a matching numbers car that wasn't really a matching numbers car. So I did the best I could to try to pull those numbers out, and we couldn't get it. And, somebody had said, well, there's people that stamp blocks, and I didn't want to get into all that, right? I mean, it is what it is. And I bought it right, and I wasn't going to screw anybody out of the car. So I went ahead and threw it up again, and classic car dealer in Florida came up and bought it. So the guy comes up and told me, he said, listen, I'm going to make this, we're going to tear this down, rebuild it, every single nut and bolt. It'll be $100,000 car by the time we're done with it. So I thought, great, the best hands for it to be in. He knew everything. I disclosed everything to him. By the way, Corvette guys are very particular. I had somebody ask me if the turnstock was original. Don't know if that's a thing, but I was asked that. I assumed it was. So anyway, while he was looking over the car, getting back to the original kind of loop of this was, he started looking at it and said, well, there's a bracket here that typically only belongs to a Fuelie car. I guess that's where the pump mounted or something. And, this, that, and the other. So I don't know the original story. I know the story that I got, but it sounds like that car at some point was a Fuelie. And I guess back in the 60s, people were taking that apart and putting carbs on them and throwing that stuff in the dumpster. And, that setup now alone, I think was like 20, 30 grand. So I don't know what happened to that car after I got rid of it. I'm assuming he did what he said and made a lot of money off it. But I don't know. It was a fun time. It was a fun story and the best way I can think of to come up with a car. So.
And you're talking about sitting in the garage and just staring at your car for a half hour. That's how I feel about the Mark IV GTIs.
Yeah. That's
Eric's up there upchucking in his sweatshirt.
we just did a video on a Mark VII, which I thought was amazing. But I'm still a Mark I guy. I almost bought one and I didn't. It was on Bring a Trailer and it got up to 15 and 15 was kind of my number. And I didn't know if I was going to get in a dueling war and get it up to 20 or something. But man, those cars, I think starting to be appreciated, but that's a car I could sit and look at for a while too. I think it's really cool.
We already asked about your competitor that's not a competitor, Drive Tribe. If you could sit down and have a beer with any of the three, hooligans over on there, who would it be? Clarkson, Hammond, or May?
Well, you always want to say Clarkson, right? I mean, I think he's the guy. But
see, I say May.
Well,
I think May is fascinating. He's got so much knowledge in his head, and he's a music major. I mean,
that's
I think May is amazing.
Well, that's kind of where I was going after that. I mean, I think you probably walk away from a conversation with him and go, wow, that was really enlightening. Where
It's
Clarkson,
4 days later, but
right, Clarkson would probably be more just a, kind of a bitch fest. But, like I saw one of May's videos where he was talking about, this is what you don't do to, it was a BMW and somebody had M-badged it and stuff. I like that kind of, that wit about him too. But, it made me think about earlier when we were talking about movies and things. I think that episode where they went to Africa the first time, where they went across the Makati or whatever it is, that to me is one of my all-time favorite car episodes ever. And I've forced everybody I know to watch that episode, but I think that's so great. And you try to walk that line between, was that scripted or not? And I think for the most part it was pretty true. But yeah, I mean, I love that. I wish that show would come back.
yeah, my favorite was the Bolivian special where they drove down Death Road and then across over to Chile to the coast, because I've been down that road on a bike before.
Oh wow!
It's got a personal connection, but that was one of my favorites.
Is that the one where they snap the rope and knock May over and he hits his head?
That's the one where they have to get the off-roaders off the barge and drive through the Bolivian rainforest, and then they get up to Death Road, El Camino de los Muertos. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I've got some buddies that do that. They take off, and I keep telling them, dude, I want to go. I rode motorcycles, dirt bikes when I was younger, but they take off to somewhere in South America and spend a couple weeks, and they drive 1,000 miles, kind of like Jude Law does, but not to that level. And they do that. And I told them, look, just bring me along as a cameraman. I'll film the whole thing. But I think that'd be amazing. But yeah, that road, roads like that. But I was supposed to, one of my trips that got canceled this summer, I was going over to Europe, and I was going to rent something really nice and go to the Stelvio Pass over there. And the first trip that I had was, I think in March was planned, and it's closed. It's closed until something late, like May or June. And then I had another trip planned, a separate trip in July, and I was going to do it again. Of course, that one got canceled, but I think something like that. And, all the pictures you see of it, it looks like there's nobody on it. So it looks like you're mostly there by yourself. And, I was going to take camera gear and get crazy, but there are definitely still some roads that I want to drive like that. I think it would just be incredible. Just you and the road, just to get out there and be away. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Man, I feel so pedestrian because I'm a big fan of the episode where they tried to put the Reliant Robin into space. So
I just watched that.
The one where he keeps sliding into frame and he's on his side or whatever. That show was amazing.
Yeah, good stuff. And that's our pit stop right there.
If you like what you've heard and want to learn more about GTM, be sure to check us out on www.gtmotorsports.org. You can also find us on Instagram at Grand Touring Motorsports. Also, if you want to get involved or have suggestions for future shows, you can call or text us at 202-630-1770 or send us an email at crewchief@gtmotorsports.org. We'd love to hear from you.
Hey everybody, Crew Chief Eric here. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Break Fix, and we wanted to remind you that GTM remains a no annual fees organization, and our goal is to continue to bring you quality episodes like this one at no charge. As a loyal listener, please consider subscribing to our Patreon for bonus and behind-the-scenes content, extra goodies, and GTM swag. For as little as $2.50 a month, you can keep our developers, writers, editors, casters, and other volunteers fed on their strict diet of Fig Newtons, gummy bears, and Monster. Consider signing up for Patreon today at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. And remember, without fans, supporters, and members like you, none of this would be possible.